Money, money, money must be funny in the rich man's world. Money, 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 always sunny in the rich man's world. All the things we could do if we had a little money. It's a rich man's world.
So as we all know, Culture Night is about opening doors and seeing our city in a new light, and that's what we hope we're going to do today. So tonight we open a door onto Dublin's International Financial Services Centre. And when this district was created in the 80s, it was really sold as a kind of jobs engine. But actually what grew here was a global financial hub. So this is a place where corporations shift profits to avoid tax, vulture funds buy up debt, landlords package our homes as commodities, and banks approve bonds that finance war and genocide. And so we begin here very intentionally at the statue of James Connolly, because Connolly stood for workers' rights, for anti-imperialism, and for solidarity. He believed in an economy that would serve the people. It would not exploit them, and that Ireland's freedom was bound up with the freedom of workers everywhere. As he warned, if you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist the green flag over Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of the Socialist Republic, your efforts will be in vain. England will still rule you. She'll rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualistic institutions she has planted in this country. And Connolly knew that colonialism survives through capital as much as it does through armies. And here in the IFSC, we see that that system is alive and well. IFSC-based funds channel money into so-called dual-use corporations, while marketing planes, satellites and electronics for civilian use, while also supplying drones, fighter jets and surveillance systems. Together, these links demonstrate how Ireland's financial architecture is connected to the world's largest armed companies, profiting from war, extraction and destruction. Far from solidarity, the IFSC represents exactly what Connolly warned against: profit over people, dispossession over justice, and militarism over life. Across Europe, we can see a growing trend. Governments are rapidly expanding arms budgets. This year alone, the EU approved a 150 billion loans for arms fund, allowing countries to borrow to buy missiles, drones, and surveillance systems. Globally, the same logic continues to repeat. Debt, finance, and war are all being braided together. And this is neoliberalism in practice. We stand at a crossroads. Global military spending has reached 2.7 trillion in 2024, an unprecedented figure. There is money for bombs, but not for schools. There's money for drones, but not for hospitals. There's money for war, but not for clean water. And in Ireland, as we speak, there are over 16,000 people without housing. 5,000 of those are children. Yet, our government plans to double defence spending by 2028, the very opposite of security. And I know that the people here today, we all know what true security is. It is a roof over your head. It's being able to see a doctor when you're sick. It is children with enough food to eat and access to clean water. And the IFSC, make no mistake, is not neutral in this. Often the financial architecture goes undercurrent without us ever seeing it. It is part of the machinery, hosting vulture funds, enabling tax avoidance, approving war bonds, and inflating rents. Tonight, we ask, what would it mean if finance were organised around care, solidarity, and peace instead of war and profit?
I work all night, I work all day to pay the bills I have to pay. Ain't it so? And still there never seems to be a single penny left for me. But to ride in our dreams, we have a plan.
while Ireland is a tax haven, people often think, oh, well, then corporations aren't paying enough tax here. But in fact, because Ireland has a low corporation tax of 12.5% and additional tax breaks on certain transactions, these big US firms choose to invest in Ireland to pay their tax here rather than at higher rates in somewhere like Germany or France or elsewhere, whose corporate tax rates in the EU, it's an average of kind of the mid-20s. So the other part of Ireland's foreign direct investment policy is something that is totally artificial. It's not related to real investment, real jobs. It's a lot of money that is flowing through a lot of the accounts that are hosted in the buildings that we see here down the quays. And that is in order for companies to, number one, avoid regulation. It's also the use of Ireland's rules as they interact with US tax rules to create tax games.
Don't come to this, don't numb it out. Let it all flow in and out. Strong enough to feel it all and keep your heart alive.
In Ireland, the British claimed that the Irish famine was inevitable. They infamously referred to it back then as the judgment of God, in addition to blaming the Irish. Israel is doing something similar now. They've resorted to a range of tactics like denying the existence of mass starvation and blaming it on Hamas and even UN distribution failures, without evidence, of course. What's happening in Palestine is entwined with our shared past and histories. We swore never again, yet it's happening again. World hunger at large can be described as a political choice and an abject failure of our current economic and political order. The world produces enough food to feed all of its 8 billion people, yet around 733 million people, or 1 in 11 people, go hungry every day. An Oxfam analysis last year found that less than 3% of the G7 countries' combined annual military spending could help end world hunger and solve the debt crises in the global south.
1 million starved, 1 million left. The population has never recovered since the famine, but it wasn't a famine, just like it's not a famine, even though it has been declared a famine in Palestine, in Gaza. It's an enforced starvation. Starving is a verb, but being starved is a transitive verb. They are being starved as we speak, and we empathize with that. But in Israel, it is where we are really seeing what the colonization right down to the siege means. So I was devastated in August, but not surprised, when they raided and then bulldozed through the siege bank of the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank in Hebron. Absolutely outrageous. A virus hit the oat farmers in the 1970s. It was in the hills of the West Bank when they trawled the siege banks of the world to try and stop the virus. It was in the wild relatives in the West Bank that they actually found the resistant strain. We require to maintain as much biodiversity as we possibly can. We need to get real about getting back control of our own food and our seed in Ireland and everywhere.
It makes the future we do, we do. Who makes the future we do, we do. Look around at who's standing with you. Who makes the future, you know we do.
The vast majority of women in Mothers Against Genocide had never been involved in anything. Palestine has radicalised. And I almost hate using the word radicalised, because there's nothing radical about believing children shouldn't be murdered. There's nothing radical about believing that imperialism and colonialism is escalating, and we need to be doing something at a grassroots level to refuse to be a part of that and to be complicit. So all of these women in particular are coming into Mothers Against Genocide, they're coming into this movement, and Palestine seems to be a real shortcut for people to understand imperialism, to understand the harms of capitalism, and without having to be around a long time, they just intrinsically get it and are moving into other spaces and are active in other spaces. We want to be unlearning everything we've learned. You know, we've been raised in a capitalist society that believes that the West, that the global North, is just ultimately dominant, and that's part of why what's happening in Palestine has been allowed to happen. There's a dehumanization and there's the Islamophobia. Like, this is a slow process that has happened over nearly 100 years.
My mother and both my grandparents were born and raised in Abbey Street, just up the road. So for me, the North Inner City is not a financial centre, but a community where people lived. This was a vibrant community, but life was very hard. People lived in poverty and in cramped conditions, and the death rate for children and infants was extremely high. The people who lived in this part of the city had to be tough and had to be resilient. But they were also warm, very kind and good. They looked after one another as best they could, and they shared whatever they had. I know this because of the stories my mother told me about this area. The financial heart of a city can be a very intimidating kind of a place, with its grand buildings, luxurious offices, and bankers and financiers working on the international stage, transferring huge amounts of money all over the place. But we have to remember that this part of the city was also the stomping ground of some wonderful people like Jim Larkin, his sister Delia, Rosie Hackett, and of course James Connolly. And here in Dublin, we can't forget our wonderful Louis Bennett, suffragette, trade unionist, and peace activist. All great people who showed us that the ordinary people, the citizenry, can take on the powers, can take on the governments, the wealth, and can bring about positive change if they're brave enough, if they're persistent, and if they believe in themselves, and if they stand together.
We believe in the vision of Ireland that was outlined at our first stop by James Connolly, so a place where housing is a public good and everyone has a safe and suitable home. But unfortunately, we live in a country where too often housing is just a tool for the accumulation of private capital and private profit and the hoarding of that capital. So in the IFSC, you have many examples. Obviously, just across the river, we have Airbnb offices, which turn housing in our city into just like tourist products. And they've been on the BDS list for a long time because they lease apartments in the occupied West Bank. Savills have an office here. Their biggest shareholder is called Fidelity. They trade in weapons, including selling weapons to Israel. AXA, insurance. They work with Kennedy Wilson, real estaters here in Ireland, as well to lease property. Private housing market has a terrible impact here on our lives. As we know, with the highest homelessness figures you've seen in the state, we have modern tenements now where we have often foreign nationals living 10 or 20 to a room in bunk beds, paying hundreds of euro for the privilege a month. Countless evictions every year, families torn apart, sent into homelessness. We have people having to move far away from their community and their loved ones because no one can afford where they grew up anymore.
Ain't gonna let no greed turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no greed turn me around. And gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
We know that civilians, women, feminized groups, racialized groups, they are the ones who bear all the consequences. And yet, time after time, their voices are not the ones who are deciding what a peace agreement will look like. The people at the table are the ones who had the guns in the first place. And it is their interests and their definition of what caused the conflict and their definition of what they want that is heard, not what happens to the vast majority of people in a conflict. Their voices and experiences aren't centered because what is centered is profit, growth, and private property, time and time again. Not health, well-being, the basic needs of an individual to live, or community. Not restoring lives, not healing the hurts, not looking at the psychological damage. None of those are centered, and yet they're all vitally important for people to be able to live together after a terrible event. And yet still their voices aren't heard. It doesn't matter how many times we see it. What we do see is money and military are often the ones who decide, and coincidentally, their priorities are always the ones that align with each other.
I'd like for all the financial institutions to focus on repentance. And by repentance, I mean they should redirect funds away from military spending and direct it towards peace building, education, health, and sustainability. Over many decades, financial ties to arms industry have caused us more harms than we can even imagine. I mean, the scale of infidelity committed by the Western financial institutions claiming to be civilized is catastrophic. These institutions have historical and systemically enabled and profited from slavery and modern slavery, colonialism and new colonialism, apartheid and racism and systemic inequality, man-made poverty, hunger and famine, climate crisis, war, genocide, displacement, and as well as land grabbing. So I would like to remind us all that ethical financial system should be a core part of how we educate, mobilize global citizenship education, because without addressing the funding and support behind militarism, we are only treating the symptoms, not the cause.
My heart is low, my heart is so low. It's only a mother's heart can heal.
The story of the central bank over the last year is a story of complete, absolute dedication to complicity in genocide. And they have been dishonest and duplicitous from the start. They started facilitating the sale of Israel bonds back in 2021. Following Brexit, Israel had to find a home country somewhere, and they landed here with their bonds. And at that stage, they funded apartheid, and they funded occupation, and they funded the prison system, and the internment of people, and the torture in the prison. So they should never actually ever have been accepted in this country, ever. But last year, 11 months into the genocide, this institution decided to renew their approval of Israel bonds. That was 8 months after the ICJ ruling. One of the things the central bank governor has said time and time again is that the Genocide Convention doesn't apply to the central bank.
Money, 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 always sunny in the rich man's world. All the things we could do if we had a little money. It's a rich man's